The second one is so absolutely incredible. I honestly was in tears preparing to record this and kind of thinking about how I was going to share this story. It's so incredible. And the story itself is amazing, but the end, the twist at the end is like off the charts. Welcome. So glad you can join me. I love this time of day. I've got some afternoon sunshine streaming in a window here and a quiet house. In my last video, I talked about how I wanted to share the most powerful, incredible strategy for business growth, for financial growth that there is. And I want to get into that. But before I do, I want you to know that I've got two stories on deck. The second one is so absolutely incredible. I honestly was in tears preparing to record this and kind of thinking about how I was going to share this story. It's so incredible. And the story itself is amazing, but the end, the twist at the end is like off the charts. So stay tuned for this story. I love stories. So what is the supernatural business strategy? It's rest, but not just any rest. It is the Sabbath. That's the Hebrew word for the rest day. It's the idea of taking one day of rest, but not just a day of rest, of honoring God by recognizing, observing a Sabbath day, a day of rest. It's not about one particular day being magical. It's not even about whether it's Saturday or Sunday. It's about honoring God and taking a day to set Him first in your life, to worship in some fashion, even if that means going into the great outdoors, but to exalt God, put Him first in your life, because the Bible is clear over and over and over again. If you humble yourself before the Lord, then He will lift you up and He will exalt you. If you try to exalt yourself, you're just going to get put down. And I could name countless scriptures that have this same running theme, that if we honor the Lord, then He's going to honor us. Okay, so I just had to run and get something to show you, to give you a visible metaphor of this. I love metaphors. I love the idea of visually getting a message, having this aha. So there's two metaphors that have helped me to get this idea. How could a Sabbath, how can a day of rest actually help you get farther ahead in life? Well, the first thing I want to tell you, I've got two of these that I want to share. The first is, my son will be thrilled to know that I just stole one of his prized possessions, but he has become an archer recently. I don't think I'm holding this in the right way. I'm left-handed, he is too, but he shoots right-handed, I think. Anyway, I believe, you know what? I'm embarrassed, but I don't even know which way you hold it. I think this is a right-handed grip. Okay, I've got a compound bow. If you're a hunter in the audience, this might be catching your attention. And if you're not a hunter, then, or you could be a hunter that uses rifles or shotguns. I've done a lot of hunting. I know all about that. Very little about archery. Just to brag on my son for one moment, he has won a couple small competitions, and just a few weeks ago we were set to go to a national archery competition that he was going to be able to participate in. Small little town in Kentucky that sadly got hit by a tornado, and so they rescheduled it in a different state and we couldn't go, so we will have to try that another time. But we were so excited to go watch him compete. But anyway, okay, so anyone, this is where you're going to make fun of me because you have to pull it back. Yeah, okay, there we go. So I'm on stage in a sense, and I have not practiced this. I just literally picked it up. Okay, so you've got your bow, and the idea of a rest day is the idea of slowing down. Here's another cat coming to visit. This one we call Midnight. He was adopted at 2 months old. He wandered up on our back porch when we had two other kittens that were only 2 months old. And Anyway, yes, we've suddenly become cat people, as I mentioned in one of my last videos. Okay, so the concept of a bow is that you have to pull back in order to shoot an arrow. The pulling back gives you a spring. It spring loads the. I know I'm not shooting properly, but it's not. I'm left-handed, and it's awkward because it's opposite. But anyway, so I'm watching myself in the video, and it looks stupid, but because I'm not direct, it's tiny. It's for a kid. Okay, bear with me. But the concept is, you pull back to go forward, right? That's the concept, and it hurts so much if you don't let go. So God, the idea of a day of rest is taking a step, slowing down, stepping back, getting clarity, getting creativity, hearing from God, seeking God, and then being in a position to be launched, spring-loaded into your destiny, to spring forward past everyone else that's grinding away, because grinding and hustling that's nothing to do with the ways of God. The ways of God are to work from a place of rest. So, first metaphor. Second metaphor, if you travel or you've ever been in a small town, you will know this concept. We used to live in Bend, Oregon, Central Oregon, in the high desert. Still love Bend. Miss all my good peeps, my people from there. Favorite places, so many of them. But anyway, in Bend, Oregon, whenever we wanted to fly to the East Coast, we actually had to fly westward or northwest. Almost every flight that left Bend had to fly northwest to Portland in Oregon or Seattle in Washington State, up in the northwest corner of America. You had to fly for an hour the opposite direction that you actually wanted to go. But when you got there, you got on a big jet that had way more power, and then you could fly in a short amount of time to the East Coast. I used to think how funny it was and ridiculous it was that in order to leave Bend, even though we were hundreds of miles east of Portland and Seattle, we actually had to fly backward in order to go forward and to get there faster in our destination. In order to spring forward in business and in finances, you have to learn to rest. You have to learn to step back. And one of the things that I want to go into great detail in more videos is how to do this. How do you rest? It's sometimes not as easy as it sounds, and I've been really digging into this because my husband and I, we had 3 businesses that we started when we got married, or I had one already, and we started 2 more. We did this with a brand new baby and barely got them built 5 years into our marriage to a level that we were totally starting to rock and profit and make money. And we had a fire and lost everything. And we were pregnant with our second child. This happened 3 days before Christmas. I have videos, I think they're on my other channel, about that story. Maybe I'll link to that here or the channel on this video. But we had to rebuild from scratch with a new baby, another child already, and basically rebuild our businesses. We thought we were working with God. We thought we were Christians. We were Christian entrepreneurs, and we did it all wrong. We hustled and we grinded for years, and we struggled to grow our businesses. We did it. We grew them fast. Even as entrepreneurs, we did amazing. But we were exhausted and we were overworked. Our marriage was stressed to no end. It's a miracle we are still married many times over. It cost my husband, he was debilitated with pain from stress, anxiety. His back would be so locked up and so seized. One of these days I'll get him on here to share some of his story. He used to lay awake the first few years we were married. He avoided going to sleep because he was trying to avoid the very next day. He was a new Christian and he was learning God's ways, and so he was still kind of flushing changing his way of thinking. But he would tell me years later, like, he would almost have dry heave when we had to open the mail because of the bills and how, we were on fumes upon fumes upon fumes. We had a home birth with our first child a year into our marriage, and with 3 businesses that were almost making nothing, and we were on food stamps. I think he would tell you we had something like $100 or $300 to our name the day he was born. It was crazy. And God brought us through, and we learned to do it by faith, miracle by miracle. We were doing it still, I want to say, like 90% the world's way of working, hustling and grinding, and 10% God's way. And things have so flipped in our lives that we still are struggling to not do it the world's way. But I think now we're really in a place that probably 90% of the time we are learning to work with God, learning to work from a place of our identity and who we were made to be. And there is a whole nother level of peace and joy in our lives, and the prosperity that we have experienced is absolutely amazing, astonishing. And I'll get into stories of that in the future. But I said I was going to tell you 2 stories, but I will say this first about this supernatural key. It's really mind-boggling, but most people know about the 10 commandments. One of the commandments is, I think it's number 4, is to remember the Sabbath, to keep it holy. And what's interesting is it's one of 10 commandments. And if I remember correctly, the first 4 are God-focused, honor the Lord your God, or that it talks about. And the other 6 are how we're supposed to interact with people, like don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery, these kind of things. So there's about right living, that vertical relationship, and then there's some about the horizontal relationships we have with other people. But if you were to actually draw it out, I'm just going to do it for fun here. I heard somebody say that if you were to take a pie chart and you took the amount of words there's 10 commandments and a whole bunch of words used to describe. So there's each command, and there's a few additional words or directives about some of them. And if you were to make a pie chart about how many words were used, that God used to describe the commandments and why, and the power of it and the importance of it, well, it's an interesting fact. Here's my pie chart. Oh, and the sun, that's really bad. Try it back here. Here it is. You can't see my circle very well. Let's try it again. I thought it was black, 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 black. Here, we'll try it again. Okay, black circle in the light. Okay, and if you can tell, it takes up about 30% of the words. The one command, God uses 30% of the language of the verses to describe this and to talk about why it's important and why it's holy. My battery is I need to change batteries on my camera, so I'm going to do that and be right back. All right, here it is, a second attempt. That took a lot longer than I thought. But the 2 stories that I said that I wanted to share are these. The first is famous. You have probably heard of it. It eventually it was made into a major motion picture years ago. And in fact, that won, it was nominated for something like 7 Academy Awards and won at least 4 of them. So the story is of a guy named Eric Liddell, and the movie was called Chariots of Fire. And Eric Liddell had trained to compete in the 1924 Olympics in Germany. He'd trained for like 2 years. He was a British athlete, and so as he was traveling to Germany, crossing the English Channel, he found out that the race that he had trained for, which was the 100-meter dash, was scheduled to be on a Sunday. He was a God-fearing person. I think he'd been raised in China as a missionary's son. Anyway, he was convicted, that being the Lord's Day and a holy day for God. He felt that he should not compete, and he needed to stick with that conviction. And so there was surmounting pressure as he shared his conviction and was having to bow out of the race because it was on a Sunday. it made national, and the news went around the world at the time. He got pressure from the Olympic Committee, all of his team, and ultimately, like the King of England at the time, or whatever the royalty was. I don't know who was in power at the time, and the Prime Minister, I think. All of these people, everyone around him was pressuring him to just race on Sunday. It's just one day. Just do it, just do it. But ultimately he said no. And so the price of his rest day, his day to honor God, was to give up 2 years of training and to be made basically a national or international laughingstock around the world. Well, a few days later, before the Olympics ended, one of his teammates had won the 400-meter hurdles, but he was also scheduled to race in the 400-meter dash. And he ended up giving his spot to Eric Liddell. Now, Eric Liddell had never run the 400-meter dash. He had trained for the 100-meter. And in an absolute incredible story, he ends up winning the 400-meter dash, wins the gold medal, and suddenly his story and his life and the God he worshipped was in the spotlight around the world. Love it. Totally worth watching that movie, and so inspiring. A great family movie to watch. I love that movie. And it still brings tears to my eyes. But this second story is also an absolute jaw-dropper. They should make a movie out of this. Maybe one day I will. But this story was actually also set quite a while ago. It was during the Second World War, like in 1945. And there was a man who owned a ski boat company somewhere here on the East Coast. I think they were in North Carolina. And they get a telegram from the government in the middle of the war, February 9th, 1945. And the government says, how many boats can you make in 19 days? So they end up having a dialogue with these government officials. They commit to making 300 boats over the next 19 days. The government, it turns out, were at war. America was at war. The Allied forces were at war with the Nazis and the Axis power. The tide had just shifted in the war. This was about a year after the Normandy invasion. They felt like they were finally getting the Nazi Germans on the run. They needed to beach and land a huge amount of infantry and tons of military weapons and all this stuff, and they wanted to keep the Nazi Germans on the run so that they couldn't dig in. Literally, that's a term of warfare where you can create your battle. You can just reinforce your defenses, and so they wanted to keep pushing them back. And so the army generals had come up with this operation called Operation Plunder. They had decided they needed something like 569 of these boats, high-powered speed boats, attack boats. They had a name for them, something like, they were like high-speed assault boats that could carry like 8-man crews with a couple outboard motors and beach at high speed and unload everything that they had. And so they went looking. They found 3 private companies in America that were boat builders, and they went to each of them and they asked them how many boats they could build. And so this company, it was called Correct Craft. The guy's name was Meloon, something Meloon. Anyway, he was like Alan Meloon or Ralph Meloon. So that's what it was, Ralph Meloon. He and his family, they commit to building 300 of these. Now you have to understand, this was absolutely an astronomical number, absolute impossible odds. Up to this point, they normally produce like 48 boats a month, something like 12 a week, 2 a day, let's say. So they committed to these 300, and they went to sign the contract with the government, and in their dialogue with the government, they made it clear that they would hire extra shifts, they would work around the clock, but they were going to take Sundays off. This family had always taken Sundays off. They felt that it was the Lord's Day. They would shut down their factories. They didn't feel it was the right thing to do was to work on the Lord's Day, and they didn't feel that anyone else should be required to work. And so as it happened in the 19-day period, three Sundays fell on this day, or fell in this period, and so they were going to need to be shut down for 3 of the 19 days. And then to add to all of this, they always shut down Wednesday at noon for 1 hour. And they offered like a chapel service for all their employees. And so the entire factory would shut down and their staff were paid to attend if they wanted these chapel services. And so the government representatives were like adamant. You had to operate 24/7, 7 days a week, meant 7 days a week, not, they had to work Sundays in order to do this. And I loved how I wrote it down. Ralph Meloon, his response to these government officials was this. He said, "We made it known to the government reps the job was impossible for man alone. We were setting our faith in God, and if they insisted on Sunday work, they could take their contract back." And so ultimately the government, they came to terms with the fact that if they wanted this company to do their best and to produce these boats, they were going to take Sundays off and take this Wednesday hour off. And so they kept their agreement. And so the very next day they started producing, churning out these boats. And the very next day they produced one boat, and their rate at that point is one boat a day. On day 2, they were able to up their production to 3 boats a day. They now had 4 boats. And on day 3, they also did 3 boats. This time they were able to do it, still taking that hour off in the middle of the Wednesday lunch hour. And now they had 7 boats. I think by Thursday they were holding strong at 3 boats a day. Didn't look very promising. And now they had 10 boats. At that point, they called a prayer meeting, or maybe it was a midweek service at one of their churches, but it sounded like a lot of people met maybe at Ralph Meloon's house, and they just started praying and asking God for help. And that night, the story doesn't specify if it was in a dream or overnight or how it came, but his brother had an idea to try out a new machine and to make a change in one of the jigs they used in their prototypes or however they did their factory work. And so it took a week for this new machine to come. So they were really working on training people. They were working on getting their shifts up to full capacity, but they're still basically doing 3 boats a day. A week later, suddenly with this new machine, they got it up and running, and their output jumped to 42 boats a day, which was incredible. And suddenly the army, the military, these generals realized they were not only going to hit their target of 300 boats, they were going to do it ahead of schedule. And so crazy enough, in the middle of this, these other 2 companies that were working 24-hour, they had 3 shifts running around the clock, or 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they were falling further and further behind. And so the government went back to Correct Craft and to Ralph Meloon, and they said, you know, we don't have enough boats. Will you make more? And so they made like another 100 boats. But the story doesn't end there. These boats are shipped over for this Operation Plunder. And the night of this invasion, the night of this assault, it was discovered that the only boats that were built correctly were Correct Crafts. 300 other boats that were produced by these other companies, they couldn't be used as anything more than rowboats. They hadn't been made correctly. And so not only did Correct Craft hit an absolute astronomical target with impossible odds, they did it ahead of schedule. And then they pulled up the leg of what the other boat builders were doing. I know that math doesn't add up, but that was how I heard the story. They did 400 of these boats, and there was another 300. So, and I know I said 569 at the beginning, but those are the numbers I heard in the story. I guess I need to go dig it in. But suffice it to say, they did an incredible, they just did something amazing. And the crafts they created were actually correctly designed to function perfectly when the companies that were running their people into the ground never even operated the way they were designed. And so this is what I share with you today, because we have to understand that rest, it's not just about taking a rest day. It's amazing the clarity and the ability to come back and creatively think and solve problems and live fully. There's so many other things I've been learning about rest and taking a day off that is just incredible, and I can't wait to share more of that, including 2 other stories that I have that are also phenomenal. When you look at the numbers and you see what is being produced by people when they take a day off in their business. It's incredible and it's mind-blowing, and it is truly a supernatural strategy straight from heaven, right out of the Bible. It's hidden in plain sight. This is something we can start applying immediately, and you can start reaping rewards in ways you've never imagined. I can't wait to share these other stories, these other 2 stories, particularly on the next video. I have some really neat information that I've been learning about even longevity connected to health and taking the rest days and just the life-changing power. Living longer. People that take rest days live longer, live stronger and more healthy through their lives, backed by incredible results, numbers that don't lie. So anyway, more on the next video. Can't wait to see you then. Thanks for sharing your day with me, your time with me. It's such an honor, and I just hope that you have a wonderful, well, I don't even just hope you have a wonderful. My challenge to you is make it a great day. Make it a great day. All right, I'll see you on the next one.